All right. Hi, Ashley. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. All right. So I'm so excited to talk to you today. So since we last time talked, the biggest things that have happened has just kind of been this increased kind of publicity thing. So I just kind of wanted to talk to you about that a little bit. Ask about what it's been like preparing for Good Morning America and major news outlets like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the thing that I didn't expect when I became poet laureate. There were some things that I sort of was looking forward to, like getting asked to speak at schools or, doing different poetry programs, basically doing my regular, poetic citizen life. But all of that big media attention was super unexpected. And as far as preparation, I didn't have much time to do that preparation because the invitations come and usually it's a quick turnaround. So with Good Morning America specifically, I got an email and I thought it was a scam actually at first. I was like, there's no way,
Yeah.
because it just came through my website contact page. And I'm like, how? Like, why would they want to talk to me? And from the email to the trip, it was maybe like 2 weeks, maybe less than that. So most of the preparation was just making sure I could get off work, making sure I knew what I wanted to wear. That was huge for me. And working with the producer on what I was going to be asked. It's not always like that for every news media outlet. Like for BBC Radio that I was on, that was literally just a call. I didn't really know what we were going to talk about. So I just had to answer the questions. So I guess as far as preparation, I'm kind of always preparing because I do public speaking and news stuff a lot. So I'm always just, for one, making sure that the work is always the center and that my work is something that I can be proud of. So that when I'm asked about it, I feel confident in answering the questions honestly. And also just making sure I have my talking points sort of together. That's maybe very useful for any aspiring writer or artist or person who wants to be a public facing person. Having your go-to answers ready for like common questions like when did you start writing? What's your favorite writer? What do you want to say to aspiring writers? That kind of thing. Just having those little nuggets ready so you can kind of go off the cuff.
That's interesting. Were there any questions that you were asked at a news outlet that were shocking or that you weren't sure how to answer or that you like weren't sure why they asked or anything like that?
Yes, actually. So on that same trip to New York, I did Good Morning America and ABC News. And at the ABC News taping, I thought I was like going to be cool because I had just done Good Morning America that morning. So I was like, yeah, this will be fine. And it turns out that they had a question prepared. I'm so glad that the guy was practicing before we went on air because I was able to see the question on the teleprompter as he practiced it. And the question had to do with some comments that the governor made about CRT that very day. And he was asking me to respond directly. At that time, I had not yet been officially commissioned. That date was like, a month after this news media. And
Mhm.
so I already had it in my mind that I was not going to make any direct statements um, at her, until that process had been completed. And so I wasn't really sure. And I'm a public school teacher. My school is, very progressive, but I am still a public school teacher in Alabama. So there's a level of, I guess, discretion that I needed to have answering that question on a national show. So I was able to sort of put an answer together. It was still a very true answer, but I knew since I already knew what I wasn't going to say, what weren't my talking points, which was I'm not going to directly say, hello, Kay Ivy, here's what I'm saying to you.
Right.
I was not interested in that. I knew that my message is all about the truth and the goodness that comes from the truth. So I just stayed very close to that truth of my own in my answer and was able to say something that was true, but wasn't the sort of sensational thing they were looking for. That's another tip if you're doing any sort of interview live, especially you have to be able to take a breath, especially when there's a question that comes in that's a little bit that they're fishing for something.
Hmm.
I've learned to just, be able to say, what an interesting question. What I believe is, and just keep it close to you, not, I'm going to say something about this thing that's going to come back and like bite you,
Yeah. So kind of in that, but different. So as you've had this kind of increasingly public eye on you, and you've also had to allocate your time differently, right? I mean, being a poet laureate of state is like a kind of big time commitment. So like, how has that affected your relationship with your writing?
I love this question. People ask me it a lot, actually. And I think another thing I wasn't exactly expecting is how difficult occasional poetry actually is. I think a lot of us who are academic poets, or at least if that's our training, you're almost taught that occasion poems are like somehow lesser poems because they're not springing from some, well of inspiration. They're not, the most complicated poems, whatever, all these lies that we are told.
Mm.
And now actually having to do those poems where someone is asked specifically for a specific thing, for a specific day, for a specific moment, um, and abiding by guidelines that are not always something that I'm comfortable with, or some not comfortable, something that I'm accustomed to, I'll say it that way. Like, for example, I have had to write poems or read poems during voting rallies, but also during business lunches. Those are two very different things, but I want the poems to be authentically me, but also honor the organization that I'm writing for. So my relationship to my writing has changed in that, for one, I do see these occasional poems as more worthy now. I understand that they are perhaps more difficult to execute in an authentic way. I mean, yeah, anybody can phone something in, but I'm trying to write real poems every single time. And I've also learned that no matter the circumstance, there is a way for me to maintain my own writing practice, even if I'm writing for somebody else's deadline. So I don't have infinite time to like work on my book, like I didn't have any before, but I really, really don't have any now.
Right.
So every time I'm asked to write has to be, okay, this poem needs to be able to like work with my book. This is my time to write. I just happen to be, doing it for a job. Somebody asked me to do it, but this poem has to still be worthwhile and still be me. So I think I value my time at the page a little bit more, because I just don't get to do it as often. Because I also don't have the energy anymore, to just spend hours writing. I just don't have it because I'm spending my whole life, doing writerly things. So yeah, I think I just value my time at the page a lot more. Um, and I'm just finding it interesting to see what comes out of me in these occasional poems.
Yeah. And I also like looking over your essays and stuff, which I know is something that you, last time we talked to you, were working kind of on more essays. Something I
Mhm,
started to feel about them was that they felt a little bit like more transparent and
mhm.
blunt than some of the poetry, right? And so I wondered about that, and I wondered like, do you like feel like they're different and kind of like what, why, or what is going on there? Like,
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. First of all, the essays don't allow you to hide as much as poems do. And my poems, I think, are pretty honest, but they're still poems. So I'm still able to put a metaphor there, so you don't really have to know exactly, what I'm talking about.
right.
And I can kind of just see one moment instead of the whole thing in a poem. But in the essay, like, man, I have found, even in the essays that I'm supposed to be writing, and we're not going to talk about, the deadline that has passed and passed again on that book that
Right.
I'm supposed to be writing. Um, but even in the more academic, crafty kind of essays, there's still just less hiding space, I think. Because in the essay form, first of all, there's so much space. There's only so many metaphors you can put in an essay without it being like, okay, what are you doing? What are you really trying to say? Um, but also I find when I sit down to write something that's in a long form, and I actually find this too with prose poems, which I've been led to a lot recently. A lot of the poems I think in the new manuscript will be prose poems for whatever reason. But in that longer format, I just find that I'm holding myself more accountable for the truth in a more truthy way, for
Yeah.
facts also. In my poems, the facts can be put in an epigraph, and the poem itself can deal only in truth, emotional truth, etc. But in the essay, it has to do both, and there has to be a foundation of factual information. So even in a personal essay, I have to deal with the facts of the matter, because it's also harder in a long form, you know, piece to paint yourself in any other way than truthfully. You can only lie to yourself for so long. At least I would hope. Now, if you can lie to yourself for
Right.
an entire like memoir, you might need to figure some things out, you know, about yourself. But I think also the poem allows for that kind of self-discovery to happen on a more blunt and factual level than sometimes a poem does.
Yeah. Are you finding that you're preferring poetry or essay these days? One or the other, or
Well, it's kind of a hard question. I was gonna just say, oh, poetry always, because that is my favorite thing to write. But the essays actually are just like long poems to me, even though I just said they're more factual. That's only because of the space, I think, that I have to
right,
fill. But as far as the writing itself, I don't necessarily feel that my essays are the essayists of essays that there could be. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's more essay people than I am. And maybe you tell me you've read them and you're not me, you know, so maybe you have a more objective opinion. But I think I prefer writing as myself. So my essays will be poetic. There's no way around it. I don't really have a different way to set up my mind other than poetically. It's just a question of how long will the line be? Will it be 10 pages or will it be lineated, you know, that kind of thing. Um, so yeah, I love poetry, but poetry is everything to me. Every
right,
genre is a poem.
right. I definitely think that I can see that in the work, and I think that it's interesting to hear you like talk about the truth element because that's kind of part of that transparency, bluntness that I was seeing before. And I think that that comes across in the essays. Um, and I think genre sometimes is less like I explicit. And so like when you're asked that question, it's kind of like, yeah, well, I'm the same writer. So right,
Yeah.
I'm trying new forms.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, have you revised any of your poems since publication? And also, are there any poems that you're like hoping to republish again someday so that you can get those revisions out there in the world?
Hmm. I'm gonna give you a non-answer, so
Okay.
I'm sorry. But I mean, in the most literal sense, no, I don't think I have. The only revision I've had to do is like if I'm reading something for a specific venue and I only have 30 seconds, or this place doesn't want to talk about this part but just wants the other part. So I just read half the poem, whatever, that kind of thing I have done
Mhm.
recently. But as far as revising poems completely, no. I tend to think that because writers operate on their obsessions constantly, we're always revising the same poem over and
Yeah.
over again. So even though, you know, I have 3 books of poetry, one could argue, and this could be about anybody, not just me, but one could argue that each book is a revision of the last book. Maybe it's
Interesting.
different topics or different poems, but my obsessions are the same. My concerns are the same. I am the same me viewing the world. And the topics that I've tackled are not solvable in one book. I'm writing about history, race, identity, womanhood, family, religion. How is that solvable in one book? So of course I'm going to go back and revise my ideas, yes, or find a new way into that topic. But I think throughout any artist's life, there's just a few themes that keep recurring. I don't think you could find a single artist. I mean, look at Salvador Dali, for Pete's sake, the most like bonkers in an amazing way, not in a, you know, mean way, artist ever, who, you know, broke every mold. But when you study his work, you can see there are similar themes, similar images throughout the expanse of his work. He found new ways into it, but in many ways it just was a revision of the same sort of ideas. And the same is true, I think, for me.
Okay.
I'm not
I def-
Dali, let me say that for
I can
I'm
definitely,
not.
I think that's really interesting. I'd never thought about that before. That's an interesting way to look at a person's work over time.
Mhm.
Um, okay, are there any current projects on your radar that you feel aren't receiving enough attention by like the broader audience, especially like the newer audience or even the older audience?
Hmm.
Like do you feel like there are projects on your radar right now that aren't receiving enough attention?
Wow. Um, Projects, do you mean like writing projects or just any things that
Well, I
exist?
mean both because you're involved in so many different kinds of projects, right?
Hmm.
And you're involved in projects for a lot of different like groups of writers and also just like different organizations and stuff. So I just
Hmm.
wondered if like you wanted to like talk about something that like you're like, hey, do people see this?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like people see everything in the best and worst ways,
Yeah.
honestly. Um, yeah, I don't know. Things that I'm involved in seem to be getting adequate eyes on them, but I'm also not necessarily like, hey, look, at everything that I'm doing. I tend to think that the audiences for projects find what they need. So like for example, this anthology that I co-edited that was just released, March, I think, of this year, called What Things Cost. It's out from the University Press of Kentucky. We've been making our rounds on some of the like best of lists for the summer and books to read that people have, lists people put together. I would love to see us on a bestseller list one day. Like, I think that anthology is so incredible, not because I co-edited it at all. Even if I had not co-edited it, I would love it. The book is examining the cost of living in America. So it's a labor anthology, but labor is very expansively defined. So there are poems from all kinds of writers. We tried to be as diverse and expansive as possible. And they talk about identity, immigration, gender, labor issues, working for minimum wage and what that feels like, working as a mom, um, uh, LGBTQ plus identity, um, all the things. I mean, there's so much in this book. It's long. First of all, it's like a 300-page anthology, but I would love to see that book just get way more attention. Not only because there are so many different authors for people to discover, and there's people who are super recognizable, like Sonia Sanchez, and people who are like me, just regular, regular old people from Alabama or other southern states or beyond in the whole country. But yeah, I would love that book to get as much shine as possible. I'd love it to be taught by people. I would love for like, New York Times or somebody to talk about it a little bit. That'd be
Right.
great. But yeah, I think
What's the
that's
title of that again?
What Things Cost.
What things cost. Okay,
Mhm.
cool. I'm excited to look at that one. I hadn't heard about it. So like,
Yeah,
yeah, we do need
there we go.
need to look at it. So
I think you'd love it, actually. I really think you'd enjoy
it sounds like something I like.
it.
Okay, so what are you reading right now?
So right now, I can't believe I actually have a book to say that I'm reading because usually I'm just like, I'm just reading student drafts. That's
Right.
all I'm ever reading. But I am reading, I mean, this is still kind of for work, but I'm enjoying this book. I am reading Built from the Fire by Victor Lukerson. It just came out, I think yesterday. It officially just came
Wow.
out, or Wednesday. Um, and it is about Greenwood, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and kind of the buildup of that city and giving a more true picture of the community instead of just sort of sensationalizing the massacre. It's showing us individuals in history who built the town. And I'm learning a lot already. I'm not done. It's a very long book, very well researched, but I'm learning so much about Western expansion and what Black people were able to accomplish in places like Oklahoma. Of course, it was all taken away because America, but it's really incredible to see that there was a moment where Black people could go and make their own way, make their own money, and they had a thriving community. It's just fascinating and heartbreaking because you know how it's going to end. But that's what I'm reading right now because Victor Lukerson is coming to Birmingham And I'll be in conversation with him on June 22nd.
Okay.
So,
That's
mhm.
exciting. That sounds like an interesting conversation too. Is it going to be virtual or just in person?
Um, they may stream it because it's going to be at the library, the Birmingham Public Library. It's in
Okay.
collaboration with Thank You Books. And usually the library has like a Facebook stream going whenever they have an event. So I'll see about that. Remind
Okay.
me so I can
Well, yeah,
see
I need
doing
to
it.
keep that on my radar too. Okay, and then my last question that I have is just kind of a general overview. What have you learned in your position so far? Just kind of in general.
I've learned so much, and I'm not even done with my term yet. I have to go until, or I'm privileged to go, I should say, until 2026. But I think I've learned, for one, how important poet laureates are to their communities.
Yeah,
I think we always take everything for granted in our society, but I think I didn't even know really how important a poet laureate could be on the ground, really until I became one. I mean, I of course have admired national poet laureates forever, and they've meant a lot to me personally just to see them rise to that level and represent poetry on a national scale. But now, having met some other poets laureate across the country, we really do a lot of work, and it really is important to our communities. I mean, I think it's a government office for a reason. This is a public
right.
service, and people don't always think about it that way. They just think, oh, poet doing poet things, but no, we are really providing space and contributing to culture, and in some ways providing another option for some poets who may not think, oh, I can be a public servant in this way, you
Mhm.
know. And I know for me, serving as the first person of color and the youngest person, I know that somebody out there is like, cool, she's doing it, I can do it. You know, I don't know what race that person is out there, I don't know what gender, what age, anything, but I know that now that the mold has been broken in Alabama, people are going to have different dreams, you know, or at least they'll feel like their dreams are more possible, which is great. um, so I've learned how important we are. I've learned that I do have a capacity, like an end point to how much I can do. I used to kind of operate as like, yeah, I've got energy forever, I'll just do everything. That's false. Like I'm tired.
Right.
So trying to learn how to manage my time a little bit better and balance a little bit better. I'm not always successful, but I'm trying. And I try to be very vocal and transparent about the fact that I'm tired because I don't want anybody to think that I'm, you know, some black superwoman or that you should just put all this work on poets because they can take it. Like, no, it's hard. You should also pay us. You know, you should always pay your poets.
I agree.
Um, and I've learned that community really means more than institutions have ever meant. Um, so, you know, I don't have any political power at all. So I'm not, you know, in the legislature or anything like that. But being around the people and hearing from them, I know that we have a strong future despite some of the legislation that's going on because the people will always be there for each other. And we have been in the past too, especially in Alabama. I mean, you can't live here and not realize that the people did the changing stuff. It
Right.
wasn't necessarily the institutions. They had to catch up with us. So that has been really encouraging to see as well.
Yeah. And is there anything final that you want to say, want to share, or anything that you want to say?
I don't think so. I'm kind of at the end of my event year, except for the June 22nd thing. And I have a June 15th thing in Gadsden, I'm realizing right now. Well, but no, I won't be doing anything after that. I'm taking a break. So I'll just see everybody in the fall, in September when I come to South. So
Right.
yeah,
Okay. So that's the Gadsden thing and the Birmingham thing, and those are the only things that you can remember off the top of your head right now.
those are the only things I'm doing in person. Yeah, I have something on June 4th, but it's like not everybody can go to that, so I won't even talk about it.
Okay.
But yeah, other than that, I'm gonna be invisible hopefully for like a couple of months and then
Good.
research.
And then come back in the fall.
Mhm.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. And just thank you.
You're welcome.